3D21. Sorry everyone. Today's update will be delayed until 9 p.m. I spent the whole day running errands, buying snacks and milk powder for my cat, and ran out of time. I'll push the update back by an hour. Xiao D has completed about 80%, but it still needs polishing and a final typo check. My apologies. 322. The storms of the castle, the daily life of Diagon Alley. Everything seemed governed by one rule: compromise. Whether it was a clash of ideas, a dispute over interests, or a quarrel about behavior, as long as it wasn't life or death, compromise was the only viable outcome. The magical world was no different. Faced with the unexpected appearance of a fourth champion, Madame Maxime and Igor Karkaroff chose compromise and acceptance. In the end, the two heads of schools even exchanged a look that hinted at mutual suspicion. Perhaps each suspected the other had known about Ino all along and had staged a ruse to make things come out evenly. Whether it had been a plot or an honest accident, both accepted the result readily. In fact, they were delighted. It was like pitting students against each other in an entertaining duel and then discovering a last-minute champion who made the contest meaningless. But this time, the champion's legs were being held by a teammate, restraining him enough that a contest could barely happen. The three headmasters agreed, and by the next day word had spread through the castle like a gale. For a week, the gossip barely died down. Everyone discussed the fourth champion as if that were the most important thing in their lives. Harry, once again, became the focus, more accurately, the subject, of the rumors. No matter how the wind howled through the corridors, the Slytherin common room, buried deep beneath the castle, remained mercifully quiet. Ino paid no attention to the outside chatter. A lot had happened in the past week, but the only thing that mattered to him was the date of the first task. After the 5 judges conferred, they set it for the end of November. How curious! Champions were chosen in early October, and the competition didn't start until the end of November. 2 full months, as if to ensure no one was shortchanged in preparation. Ino had no intention of prying into Dumbledore's plans. That would be pointless. What he needed to know, the old headmaster would tell him. What he didn't need to know, forcing the issue would only create needless complications. If the headmaster wished to take the lead, Ino was content to be idle on many matters. In the Slytherin dormitory, Ino took off his plain robe and slipped into the blue tunic he had knitted from spider silk weeks before. A week had crept by, and today was the day he had agreed on with Marcus. "Ino, do you think I should go?" Draco hesitated before asking. "You," Ino replied after a moment. "It's up to you. If you want to go, go. If not, stay in the dorm and rest. As a shareholder, you have the choice." Draco exhaled in relief. He was glad not to be over-involved in the business. "Ha! It's not as serious as you think," Ino added, reading Draco's thoughts. He didn't suspect people without evidence. It would be foolish to fly into a rage based on Crumb's one-sided account. Still, ignoring things and not paying attention were different matters. Crumb's words reminded him that a community of interest was only strong when its members were equal. As Ino prepared to leave, far away on Diagon Alley's main street, the atmosphere in one shop was subdued. The Mirrorworks, a roughly 100-square-meter shop originally owned by the Malfoys and later financed by Draco, hummed quietly. It had 2 floors, the shop on the ground floor and a conventional storage space above. That might seem wasteful, but with limited stock and variety, it made sense to keep sales concentrated where customers could find them. The ground floor was open and trading, though business was a little thin and the shelves were not fully stocked. The 2 young shop assistants on duty had already slipped into slack mode, each with a bag of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans and idly chatting. The assistants, 1 male and 1 female, looked no older than 20. The female, Penelope, had the air of someone who'd just left Hogwarts. "Penelope," the male asked from behind the counter, curiosity mingling with bored resignation, "why do you think they're not focusing on production? Why are they all coming to the shop instead? Did something big happen? Or are they going out of business?" "I don't know," Penelope replied calmly. "But Mr. Flint, you know the situation. Orders from all over the world are booked through next year. If your cousin knew you were hoping for us to go under—" "Stop!" Marcus Flint cut himself off and sobered instantly. As a disregarded branch of the Flint family, he knew too well how the purebloods operated. The image of Marcus with a smiling mask, hiding cold ruthlessness, flashed through his mind. If that's true, don't say nonsense. If you've nothing to do, just lie down and sleep. Penelope turned away from her colleague, who promptly fell asleep with his head on the counter. She had only been speaking casually, but she was the one left feeling helpless. As a Ravenclaw prefect and former head of the Hogwarts Student Council, she had expected at least a respectable position after graduation. Reality had taught her otherwise. Muggle-born witches and wizards had little chance at prestigious ministry jobs. The supposed openness was often a veneer. Even perpetually overlooked departments like the Centaur Liaison Office remained under half-blood control. If one path doesn't work, try another. Penelope glanced toward the stairs leading to the warehouse above. Some people were simply born to be upstairs. Others had to remain below, and the scant opportunities to stay there often depended on connections. Her membership in the student council and her prefect's badge counted for little now. What had seemed like glory in the castle seemed absurd in the light of the real world. Some she had once looked down upon now seemed secure and respectable. She, who had been student council president, now worked behind a counter. Her wages were decent, but she was, at the end of the day, still a shop assistant. 3 to 23, first board meeting. While Penelope was exclaiming downstairs, the atmosphere on the shop's second floor felt oddly tense. The space, over 100 square meters and once a warehouse, had been cleaned and rearranged. A long table, nearly 20 feet, sat in the center, surrounded by 12 high-backed chairs. If a Hogwarts professor had walked in, they would have recognized the faces. Former castle celebrities were gathered around the table. Marcus Flint, Mina Burke, even Percy Weasley with his cropped red hair. All of them were involved in running the moving picture mirror. I feel like this came on a bit sudden. Does anyone know why? Marcus said, sweeping his gaze around the room. His question sounded light-hearted, but the look in his eyes was cooler than his chuckle suggested. The 11 others ignored him. His manner did nothing to loosen the silence. When the awkwardness stretched, Mina Burke, the old Slytherin prefect, broke it. Don't ask. If anyone knows, everyone knows. If not, go ask Malfoy. He knows best. I did ask, but he wouldn't say, Marcus answered with a laugh. Percy sat back and watched them trade barbs. Marcus and Mina were clearly trying to probe the others, Marcus in charge of Diagon Alley, Mina responsible for Nocturne Alley. But there were no fools in the room. Everyone tacitly kept their silence. Minutes ticked by in that skittish air until a faint chill ran through the room. A blue halo flashed, and a figure appeared with a familiar voice echoing in all their ears. Sorry to have kept you waiting. Eno smiled at the faces around the table and nodded in greeting. His smile, though, hardly mattered. Everyone instinctively bowed their heads. The flash of the blue phoenix had that effect. It was like looking directly at curses and death. Oh, sorry, I forgot Fide's quirk, but there's no other way. As you all know, the school dormitory fireplaces aren't on the Flu network. He spoke slowly, every word earnest. Looking at the 12 shareholders who had lowered their heads, a pleased smile twitched in his eyes. That was the point. He played the good cop while Fide played the bad. Whether or not the operation had problems, the performance was necessary. In the pure-blood world, reputation often mattered little next to a show of strength. Satisfied that the intimidation had worked, and careful not to overdo it, Eno reached out and lightly stroked the phoenix's back. Fide, go home and play with the little folk. You've frightened my friends enough. The blue halo blinked, and Fide vanished. With the phoenix gone, the oppressive edge in the room eased. Fide's dramatic, Eno said briskly, producing a box of liqueur chocolates from his pocket and setting it on the table. The sweets multiplied into a large platter and slid toward them. Chocolate will help. It does wonders, I promise. Thank you, Mr. Swinburne. This is the best chocolate I've had. Marcus peeled back the wrapper on one and popped it into his mouth with decisive good manners, ignoring any unwritten rule against eating random things in the wizarding world. Once he started, the rest followed. Like Lupin had said in the original, chocolate quieted nerves. Within minutes, the room relaxed. Thank you for the compliment, Marcus, Eno said with a small laugh. Actually, there are 2 items on today's agenda. First, the matter of Victor Krum, the Bulgarian seeker. He had promised to give Krum an answer and intended to keep it. Krum contacted me. What do you all think? After laying out the facts, he fell silent and spread the question among them. Marcus stiffened. That's not true. Please believe me. We didn't receive a letter. We really didn't. Durmstrang's headmaster, Karkaroff, has always dealt directly with us. Marcus's voice carried a thread of panic, understandable since he handled public business, but in his haste he'd said, we, and that slip stung. Percy's expression hardened. He hadn't come to share responsibility for Weasley business. Excuse me, Percy cut in. I don't know anything about that. Letters and external sales are handled by Mr. Flint. Percy's words echoed through the room. Except for Mina, everyone nodded. Marcus colored with humiliation. He was about to retort when Eno stood and crossed to a cabinet at the corner. A moment later he returned and set a stack of correspondence and a thick ledger on the table. These are the letters with Karkaroff, he said. This book has the post-World Cup sales statements, pre-sale deposits, orders, quantities, everything's recorded. Veritaserum, I drink it! Marcus blurted, half in defiance, half in desperation. He felt betrayed. Only Mina had trusted him so far. He wanted to prove he wasn't hiding anything. Eno's brow tightened. He knew that administering Veritaserum would be unthinkable. It would ruin relationships and business, especially for families like the Flints and Weasleys. It wasn't just a moral question. It was pragmatic. Checking the ledgers was reasonable. Besides, his instinct told him Marcus wasn't lying. The Flint family, among the ancient pure-blood lines, hadn't survived by being reckless. When the family released records, old Flint had long preferred losing money over losing face. With that thought, Eno made a decision. No one needs Veritaserum. We're all friends here, he said. As for Krum, it seems likely the problem is on Durmstrang's end. That doesn't implicate us. Thank you for your trust, Marcus replied gravely. No, you've shown it with facts. Eno tapped the ledgers. Public matters needed to be handled by the book. Marcus managed a rueful smile and fell silent, chastened. All right then, second matter, the Triwizard Tournament. Eno's fingers drummed the tabletop. This is an opportunity. We could produce a special commemorative edition, but it's tricky. First, we'd have to deal with two very particular department heads. He explained his thinking. In the original competition, the latter tasks had been dull, and in his view, almost anti-spectacle, diving underwater, getting lost in a maze as if they were afraid of being watched. Now was a chance to make the tournament more spectacular. At the very least, the underwater task should be rethought. 324, Felix Felicis and the Ravenclaw Diadem. Shakespeare once wrote, "He who abandons time, time also abandons him." Eno never agreed. No matter how you treasured time, it could still slip away from you. It had been a month and a half since the last meeting in Diagon Alley. Mid-November was here, less than 2 weeks until the first task of the Triwizard Tournament, and Hogwarts was taut with a nervous restlessness that only grew more obvious by the day. In the Slytherin dormitory, Eno leaned lazily against the headboard, a soft quilt folded behind him, the steady crackle of the fireplace filling the room. Everything always looked so calm and beautiful. Lately, he'd cut down on unnecessary outings. Apart from classes, he rarely left the dormitory, no trips to the library, no wandering the castle. At first, it had been manageable. The other 3 champions kept the public eye spread thin, and the general anxiety was tolerable. But that stability lasted only a month. At the end of October, a new event pulled him fully into the spotlight, the Order of Merlin. It was only a third-class medal with a white ribbon, awarded for contributions to scholarship or the public good. But Eno's youth made it extraordinary. Since the 12th century, the order had never been given to a current Hogwarts student. A third-class medal plus the title of Triwizard Champion was an unprecedented combination. It was meant to be an honor, but it brought problems. Wherever he went, he was either stared at or cheered. At first, it was flattering. Eventually, it was exhausting, so he retreated. Blue Lantern did the cooking, Draco brought meals back on his way through the castle, and the two-way mirror kept him connected when he wanted it. Hermione's face was the one that always popped up in his mind when he thought of that mirror. He had told her more than once she didn't need so many potions experiments, but she was incorrigible, a wound-up alarm clock of industry. When she wasn't in classes, she would hide in the room of requirement, brewing until late. Maybe the Slytherin dormitory had become a room of requirement in its own way. Just as Eno thought of the two-way mirror, the headboard vibrated. A drawer opened and a 3-inch mirror floated out and hovered in midair. The moment it connected, Hermione's voice, brisk and excited, poured through. Eno, I did it. The Felix Felicis brewing time's been shortened. Thanks for telling me about that room. It's amazing. Hermione was too excited to mind the angle of the mirror. Cough. Hermione, could you lift the mirror a foot? I can't see your cauldron. Eno's tone was mild, a subtle reprimand. She was careless about appearances. Hermione blinked, looked at the mirror, then at the screen and realized how it was framed. Ah, I have to go. Need to add more ingredients. She disconnected without another word. The mirror went dark, but the damage was already done. Hermione sat cross-legged on the floor and felt her face burn. All the girls in her dorm liked to say that if you had talent, you should show it, but this wasn't showing off. Crazy, she scolded herself. What will Eno think of me? I should have fixed the angle earlier. She glanced at the time turner at her neck and for a second wanted to twist it, but she knew better. Even if she could go back, she couldn't change what someone had seen. Eno, meanwhile, was turning over what he'd heard. Felix Felicis. Shortened brewing time. That was extraordinary. He knew Snape had been giving private lessons, and he'd expected Hermione to be talented, but Felix Felicis was a pinnacle in potions. Cutting even a single day off its brewing could be grounds for an Order of Merlin. Many of the people honored with medals had been potion makers. Damocles Belby, who developed Wolfsbane potion, had received a higher second-class medal. Even Newt Scamander only received a second-class award for Fantastic Beasts. Potion's achievements carried real weight. An idea formed. The Ravenclaw diadem he had previously obtained had been a mystery. He'd lacked the information to study it properly. But the effect of the diadem, as an alchemical, or perhaps magical tool, was similar to the effect of Felix Felicis. Both brought a kind of intuitive clarity, a calm mental state in which thinking became effortless. If the underlying mechanisms were alike, maybe the progress Hermione had made with Felix Felicis could inspire a way to research the diadem. He might be able to draw conclusions from one to the other. He picked up the two-way mirror again, ready to call Hermione, then paused. Putting himself in her shoes, he realized she would be mortified if he interrupted her now. Forget it. Wait until tomorrow, he decided, and set the mirror back down. When he moved, he left the dormitory as quietly as he had entered. Sanctuary Valley was flourishing. Blue Lantern's care had made everything thrive. Eno hadn't come for the herbs this time. He'd felt a thin, insistent magical pull. He followed it to an impossibly beautiful garden. Stones gathered by Rohan's children gleamed among bright branches and crystal flower buds, colors so vivid they seemed to hum. No matter how long you looked, the garden made you feel a warm, easy joy. No time to share knowledge points today, but even so, Xiaodi still asks for votes. Votes, evil laugh. 325. Colorful River. There's always a colorful river winding through Fairy Tale Town, separating ideals from reality, only to converge again in the valley ahead. Amid a sea of bright flowers, Eno hummed softly. It felt almost magical. Even after so long, every time he saw these blossoms, he was pulled back to that time. A simple Christmas hat, a pretty glass bottle, or a scrap of candy could keep children happy for days. But he worried that the next time he went to Middle-earth, the children of Rohan might already be bowed under life's practical demands, separating ideals from reality. He took off his boots and sat barefoot on the soft earth, looking at the dazzling field. Following a tug in his chest had brought him here, and only on arrival did he notice that the sugar wrapper-colored leaves shimmered faintly, and the crystal buds among them concentrated light like tiny lenses. From a distance, the little garden seemed to glow. Walking to the center, he found a slender, 5-foot-tall tulip standing graceful and elegant. Its petals were silk smooth. At the top, the bud shone like a ruby, vivid and full of life. But it was still just a bud. That didn't disappoint him too much. Even if a ring that contained the laws of Middle-earth had been given to him, it would be useless without the changes that made those laws meaningful. Some things simply required patience. The more precious, perhaps, the longer they needed to ripen. After seeing the tulip, he He was sure the summons had come from other flowers, so he didn't leave. He sat barefoot among them and watched. Time seemed to pause with the perfume of the blossoms. He lost track of how long he sat there. Eventually, a thin red beam of light rose from the flowers, then orange, yellow, green, blue, more and more colors converging into the crystal buds. When each bud matured, it launched its light into the air. There were just as many beams as there were blooms, and the number of branches seemed to match the number of stones planted in the ground. He wasn't sure how many children there were in Rohan, but from morning till dusk, he had hardly stopped handing things out. By the end, it had become almost automatic. Beams of light climbed into the valley sky until, at last, the last one vanished and a vast ocean of rainbows pooled above. The chaotic bands of color seemed to take on a slow awareness. They stretched, thinned, and at length braided themselves into a winding river of color suspended in the blue. Eno lay back on the warm earth, hands clasped behind his head, staring. The rainbow's flow was impossible to explain by ordinary optics. Light refracts and reflects, disperses and bends, but it never flows like water, curving and winding through the air. That impossible river made the sky over the valley dreamlike. He stayed on the green grass, watching the colorful stream drift overhead. It didn't do anything obvious, no fireworks, no show of power, but he didn't need it to. Not everything must prove itself by usefulness. Like travel or a beautiful view, its meaning lay in the quiet shift it gives the mind, a chance to step out of routine and breathe. From now on, whenever he returned to the valley and looked up, there would be that winding river in the sky, and that alone felt enough. After a while, he sat up. The earlier sensation of being summoned had fully faded, and he slipped away without fanfare. He didn't notice, in the white cottage at the valley's edge, a small hand prying open the box of books and dolls Nicholas had left. The lid eased aside, and the gifts were touched for the first time. Hogwarts. The great hall buzzed with noise at the end of dinner. Draco tapped his cutlery against his plate. Once his original plate disappeared under a polite spell, the cleared spot was already replaced by another untouched serving. This sort of slight was ordinary now among the Slytherins and the new Durmstrang students. After a month and a half, the visitors from the other European schools had settled into Hogwarts. They had fixed places at the tables. Durmstrang fell in with Slytherin's rhythm, while Beauxbatons chose to sit with Ravenclaw. The Beauxbatons students, especially the girls, charmed everyone. The boys from the castle's 3 other houses found themselves more and more taken with the elegant French girls, their smiles, their tosses of hair, while Fleur herself, with keen social grace, flowed easily among the Hogwarts crowd. Prefects from all 4 houses were often seen hovering nearby, like loyal guards around a queen. Things often happened when you least expected them. Just as Draco was about to leave, a heated scene erupted at the 3rd long table on the left, the Gryffindor table. "I told you. I don't know. I've told you 100 times." Harry slammed the table. A few passing Hufflepuffs had been speaking in approving tones about Cedric's excellence, and their voices had reached him. Unlike the original story, Slytherin had largely cooled toward Harry. Draco's taunts had diminished, but the Hufflepuffs had become the loudest force in the room. It had little to do with house loyalty and more to do with human nature. People don't resent scarcity so much as inequality. The arrival of a 4th champion had truly upset the balance. In the original story, because Cedric had been chosen as a champion, the Hufflepuffs had kept their distance. Now the situation was reversed. With Eno and Slytherin choosing to hang back, the burden of confronting Harry had fallen on Hufflepuff. Even a month and a half later, the Hufflepuffs were still sore. But Hufflepuff was Hufflepuff. They were petulant, but not vicious. There were no outright brawls or personal attacks, just a steady, oppressive stream of remarks. When every student in the castle contributes a single barb, the volume becomes its own kind of assault, and Harry felt it to the bone. The sarcasm that used to be confined to the corridors now followed him into the great hall, crowding his every meal. Harry was on the verge of snapping when another voice cut through the noise. "If you're unhappy with the Goblet of Fire's decision, go see Professor Dumbledore. Go see the 2 department heads at the Ministry. Throwing insults here doesn't make you brave." Ginny rose to her feet. She was only a third year, but she stepped out alone in front of several Hufflepuffs without hesitation. She looked slight, but there was nothing girlish about her bearing now. She had the fierce protectiveness of a lioness. Seeing Ginny stand up, Hermione didn't hesitate either. Hermione didn't have many friends at the castle, pitifully few, really, but Ginny was one of them. Once they had spoken, the rest of Gryffindor caught on. Ron, Neville, Seamus, George, Fred. One by one, more of them rose and made their position clear. Harry felt something warm and steady pour into him. The cold weeks of ridicule suddenly seemed trivial. The anger he'd been nursing evaporated. Seeing his friends gathered there, he felt uncommonly small and fierce at once, eyes prickling with moisture, confidence quietly swelling. With his friends beside him, difficulties seemed surmountable. Ginny, who had been at the front, glanced back as if sensing the change. Their eyes met across the throng, and in the charged silence, another, subtler feeling flickered into being. Across the hall, Draco had been watching the commotion. He didn't join in, and he didn't leave. "Draco, aren't we going over? Maybe they'll come to blows." Crabbe leaned in, earnest and blunt. "Why would we go over there?" Draco lifted his chin and looked at his companion. "If you want to, go yourself. Eno doesn't let me get close to Harry." Despite the temptation of the drama, Draco watched for a moment longer, then picked up his plate and walked out of the great hall without a backward glance. As Draco exited, Crabbe's simple face lingered on the Gryffindor side, thoughtful for a beat before a slow, silly smile spread across him. Later, in the Slytherin dormitory, Draco recapped the evening while Malfoy's little recording device played back snippets like a private newsfeed. "Yes, I didn't go over, but I saw everything," he said as he ate. "You wouldn't believe who stood up first, George and Fred's little sister. And then your Granger was the next." "What do you mean, my Granger?" Eno snapped, cutting off the teasing half-joke before it went any further. He had been listening to the report with a bored air, but Draco's tone made him bristle. "I mean what I said," Draco said, amusement in his voice. He leaned in, conspiratorial. "You and she chat on the two-way mirror every day. No one else knows, except me. You can make certain promises about yourself, Eno, but you can't make promises about the other side." Draco rattled on, enjoying the small scandal. In the stretch of time away from Harry, he'd found a new delight, eavesdropping on secrets and bringing the juiciest bits back to the dormitory. Through the Gryffindor girls, it's everywhere now. And you know what that does? Lots of girls start distrusting love, because that's what happens when a pair like yours breaks. "Stop." Eno cut him off again, half annoyed, half amused. "Honestly, Malfoy, if you ran a magazine, you'd make a fortune." Draco paused at the word magazine, then his eyes lit up as if the idea had just sparked something else. Eno didn't press it. Draco's chatter had finally subsided, and he was happy for the peace. But the night's small drama had planted a new thought. Maybe he'd read Dumbledore's motives too cleverly, or perhaps there hadn't been any elaborate plotting at all. Either way, the scene in the Great Hall fit a familiar pattern of human behavior, a person pushed to a breaking point, publicly exposed, and suddenly defended by friends at the moment they need it most. Harry had missed those 2 formative years of hardening that other versions of his life had given him. He was fragile in places, yes, but vulnerability is where people often grow the fastest. Bright moments of loyalty and affection can spur a person forward. Eno pulled a long breath and allowed himself a quiet admiration. If Dumbledore had calculated anything, it was this. Inequality breeds controversy, but Dumbledore also trusted the better sides of people. He trusted that when Harry was at his lowest, someone would step up. It might not be an immaculate, flawless plan, just a shrewd understanding of human nature. People would suffer. That was part of every hero's story. But suffering did not mean standing alone. 327. Publish a magazine of memories. In the intricate tapestry of life, a thread of a different color sometimes appears without warning, and it is precisely those different threads that make the whole weave vibrant and alive. The next morning, after washing up, Eno heard some unexpectedly bold news. "Are you sure you want to publish a magazine? A Hogwarts monthly?" "I'm sure. I thought about it all night." Draco nodded seriously. The idea had come to him after a night of thinking. Why not start a magazine? At first, it could be a monthly issue, collecting oddities and little stories from around the castle. and they could even bundle it with the two-way mirrors to sell film content alongside the written pieces. He imagined each issue containing both text and recorded vignettes from life at Hogwarts. Seeing Draco's earnest face, Eno kept silent. It sounded reasonable and wouldn't cost much. At that meeting in Diagon Alley, he had seen the ledger Marcus brought out. If they fulfilled those orders, the dividends would be enough for Draco to do as he pleased. "If you like it, go ahead," Eno said finally, "but you'll have to work to gather stories. If it's boring, it will hurt the reputation and sales." "I've already thought of that. Buy the news," Draco replied confidently. "Scarhead's lackey, Gryffindor's Colin, Ravenclaw's Carl." He rattled off a list of names. Eno could tell this wasn't a passing whim. Draco had a real plan. It was a good idea, too. Last year, Percy and Penelope had come back only to buy a few two-way mirrors for their graduation pictures. In England, many people who leave Hogwarts after 7 years rarely have another chance to step back into the castle. That felt unfair. A magazine with film records from the two-way mirrors could let grown wizards revisit their youth. Thinking of that, Eno told Draco his own thoughts. "Leave it to me. It'll be a mainstream magazine," Draco declared grandly, then added something else. "Oh, Eno, do you want to invest? Just the two of us?" "All right, I'll put in 500 galleons." For something this meaningful, he didn't want to refuse. 500 galleons was a small stake but a clear show of support. Memories inside the castle, excitement beyond it. "Good, I'll write the proposal now." With Eno's backing, Draco beamed and strode off to his dormitory to begin. It was a little childish, but Eno didn't dampen his enthusiasm. "Write it well," he told him. "We can discuss it when you have time." While Draco busied himself, Eno summoned Corvus. With a flash of the phoenix, the dormitory fell quiet. On the 8th floor, a flash of red light streaked down the right corridor. Eno arrived at the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy being clubbed by trolls. He needed somewhere quiet to brew potions. After passing by the tapestry 3 times, a door appeared in the wall, the room of requirement. Inside, Hermione was bent over a cauldron, a pale white steam curling up. The smell of brewing Felix Felicis was sharp and not particularly pleasant, but after a moment, Eno stopped noticing it. Candlelight softened the room, and Hermione sat alone, wrapped in a faint glow. Her brown hair was pulled back casually. She wore a plain robe, thin velvet leggings beneath her skirt, and a pair of sensible khaki ankle boots. It was an ordinary outfit, but her expression drew his attention, calm, composed, and concentrated beyond her years. Her movements at the cauldron were measured and precise. Every stir, every measure seemed deliberate. She looked utterly absorbed, for now she hadn't looked up. Eno lingered exactly to the side, careful not to disturb her. Time ticked by quietly. After a while, Hermione changed her method. She stopped stirring, opened a bag at her side, and pulled out several oddly shaped herbs. She held each one to her nose, inhaling carefully, as if conversing with them in silence, then placed them into the cauldron with practiced ease. When she finished, she finally looked up. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "I knew you were here, but I really couldn't be distracted just then." Her voice filled the roomy silence. Eno wasn't offended. Concentration deserved respect. "I should be the one apologizing. I almost disturbed you." Once she made sure she wouldn't be busy again for a while, Eno stepped forward. "You surprised me yesterday. Felix Felicis can actually be brewed faster? The 6-month process has always been the hardest part." "It's not that it's impossible," Hermione replied, reaching up to smooth the lock of hair that had escaped earlier. "But it's not entirely my discovery." She looked away for a moment, a little embarrassed. "A lot of the improvements came from Professor Snape. He had ideas to shorten the process, but for some reason he stopped." Eno noted the pause. Hermione had lied a little the day before, but he didn't think ill of it. Continuing someone else's work didn't diminish her effort. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked. "Of course. I won't ask for free. I'll compensate you, alchemy knowledge, or something else." He already had an idea of what to offer. Seeing Hermione so focused, he thought an alchemy puppet that could assist in brewing would be a fair trade. A puppet useful in alchemy would be useful in potions. As for the life and vitality such a puppet might require, he had a solution. At worst, he'd have to recharge or recall it once a year as part of after-sales care. Hermione quickly shook her head. Her hand ruffled her hair again, making it slightly disordered. She refused the offer without hesitation. There's no need for an exchange. I can decide this myself. When Professor Snape gave me the notes, he said whoever could complete them would earn the honor. Hermione bit her lip, stubbornness written all over her face. Don't be so quick to refuse, Eno said with a smile. You'll see, it'll be useful. But right now I'm curious. How much did you shorten the Felix Felicis by? Hermione blurted the answer without thinking. The cost went up by 30%, and the brewing time was cut by a month, just enough to make it for the second task. Hearing that, Eno worried about Professor Snape's private stores. Hermione, being Muggle-born, might not understand the rarity and expense of some potion ingredients, but he did. Brewing Felix Felicis was essentially burning money. Hermione, though, didn't dwell on it. There might still be ways to save costs later, but there's no time to consider them now. Her voice trailed off halfway through. She didn't need to finish the sentence for him to understand. Hermione was still the same, stubborn to the end once she'd decided. Hermione, listen to me. You listen to me first. She cut him off decisively. She knew he could guess her thoughts, and she could guess his reply. Eno, you can't treat this lightly. In 1452, during the Triwizard Tournament hosted by Beauxbatons, one champion died fighting a horned serpent, and 2 professors were injured. In 1530, when Durmstrang hosted, she began reciting the bloody history of the Goblet of Fire like a textbook, a litany of accidents that seemed to recur every century. Trust me, even if you don't think you need the Felix Felicis, take it with you. She looked up at him then, gaze steady and unwavering. Who could refuse that? Eno thought about Draco's remark, and about the way he had been able to get through to the two-way mirror so often over the last month and a half. He remembered Hermione waiting on the astronomy tower alone, and the way she kept producing potions from her pocket like a tiny, determined hoarder. Whatever had shifted in his mind, he'd reached an answer. All right, he said. I'll take the Felix Felicis. Hermione's face lit up. And Harry? She hesitated, a little resentful. He has Professor Snape. I tried to get a ready-made Felix for you before, but the answer I got was that I must brew it myself. That's fine. Eno waved a hand and smiled. Perhaps in Snape's eyes, Harry needs it more than I do. He wasn't surprised by Snape's choice. In the whole story, the 2 people who cared for Harry the most were probably Snape and Sirius, and fate had put them at odds. Eno didn't intend to pry. Asking that much had been the most he would do. After that, the atmosphere in the room of requirement was unusually harmonious. Clever people think in much the same way. Fools are foolish in their own unique fashions. Both of them were clever, and though a few things remained unspoken, accepting the Felix Felicis quietly became an understood compromise. Wait here a moment, Eno said, glancing at the potion simmering in the cauldron. He vanished, and a moment later reappeared, holding a magnificent diadem. The legendary item, Ravenclaw's diadem, he announced before Hermione could react. Oh my goodness, it really exists. I thought it was just a legend. Hermione's eyes widened with disbelief and delight. Eno handed it to her, but his tone grew serious. You can only wear it 15 minutes a week, and only when I'm watching. The diadem's power was unquestionable, and that restriction was his precaution. Great gifts come with risks, and an extreme mind could easily become dependent. Hermione accepted the condition without hesitation. The blue sapphire at the center caught the candlelight and shimmered with shifting colors as she examined it. Can I wear it now? She asked. Of course, Eno said, and watched carefully. Once Hermione placed the diadem on her head, she seemed to change. Her outward appearance was the same, but her carriage became noble and composed, as though the diadem were made for her. She extended her hand, studiously regarding her palm for a moment before lowering it and turning her attention to the cauldron. She gave no other sign, but Eno could see she had sunk into deep, inward contemplation. It was uncanny how well she fit the diadem, like a missing piece finally in place. It brought to mind the sorting in the original story, when Hermione had been torn between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor. Some people and objects, after a certain turning point, drift from their intended paths. The 15 minutes passed in an instant. When Hermione took the diadem off, she looked fatigued, not just tired, but slightly dazed, as if she might topple. Eno stepped forward and steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. "It seems 15 minutes is still a bit much for you," he said. "It's all right," she murmured, feeling the support. After a brief rest, she opened her eyes again. "Eno, I think I heard Lady Rowena's voice. All day. 8K. Shouty tried his best. Finally, please vote, please vote." 329. Hermione's thoughts. The room of requirement was dim and mysterious in the candlelight. Even more mysterious at the moment was what Hermione had just said. "Are you sure? You heard Lady Ravenclaw's voice?" Eno's face went serious. This was unexpected. Logically, once the diadem had been brought into the sanctuary, any unknown attachments should have dissipated. Lord Voldemort's remnant soul had been a clear example, but Hermione's next words eased his concern. "I'm not sure it was Lady Ravenclaw," she said, "but I heard a voice. It only said one sentence." She sank to the floor, a brief, faraway expression crossing her features before she spoke in a soft voice. "Overcoming wisdom is the greatest wealth." "That's it?" Eno exhaled, suddenly relieved. For a moment he'd feared some huge, plot-twisting revelation, ancient Ravenclaw legacies, a 1,000-year conspiracy, but the phrase was more like a simple prompt, the reassuring beep of a Muggle game console when you've turned it on correctly. Still, he thought it better to be cautious. "Hermione, 15 minutes is a bit long. If you want to use the diadem again to think, don't go over 10 minutes. After a moment's thought, he shortened the time. Hermione responded with a light nod as if she accepted his suggestion. Strangely, she didn't argue. Something in her demeanor felt off to him, like a missing piece of the person he knew. Hermione, however, wasn't thinking about the diadem. From the moment Eno had touched her shoulder, she'd been considering whether she should deliberately let herself fall, exactly as the girls in the dormitory had suggested, to create an opportunity for being held. If she did fall, how should she act so it looked natural, instead of obviously calculated? The thought tangled her up in hesitation and uncertainty. Eno's words slid past her. He noticed it too. Hermione seemed spellbound. Her eyes were unfocused, her breath shallow, and in the candlelight she looked dazed. "Hermione, want me to have Corvus take you back? These potions are safe here anyway." No one is a fool, she looked easy enough to read. But the room, cauldrons simmering low, white steam curling upward, a few open books scattered about, felt like a classroom. "Potions? Oh, right, potions." Hermione blinked and came to herself. "I have to write this down. I just had a new idea. Bat spleen could be replaced with lionfish spine powder, and also flowing fluid grass and peppermint." She pulled a thick notebook from her bag and immediately began to jot everything down. Time moved on. Late November, the penultimate weekend of the month. Friday, after the last charms class, Harry walked out of the classroom exhausted. Since the backing from Ginny, Ron, and Hermione, and after Cedric's intervention, he had felt some relief. Fewer accusatory looks, fewer rumors. Things had seemed to be heading in a better direction. But suffering, it seemed, liked to pick new targets. When the mental torment eased, the physical training began. He used to look forward to the sound of the bell at the end of the day and to weekends. Now he dreaded both. The end of the last class meant he had to go out of the castle to practice with Mad-Eye Moody. The thought of Moody's scarred face and that madly rotating magical eye made Harry uneasy. He sighed as he walked along the path outside the castle, knowing Moody was trying to help, and that, despite the methods, the results were significant. He'd clearly improved. If he dueled Malfoy again, he was now confident he could dodge all his spells. Dodging was Moody's primary lesson. Moody's hut was visible in the distance, a round house not far from Hagrid's. "Hurry up! You don't have time to waste," Moody called, spotting Harry lingering before the hut. The urging made Harry pick up his pace. Dodging and elusiveness had become second nature. "Dodging is the first step to becoming an Auror," he remembered Moody saying when they first met. "No matter how powerful a spell is, if it can't hit you, it's useless." Outside the hut, Moody relaxed a little when he saw Harry quicken. "Come here. No dodging practice today. I'll teach you 2 tricks. Hagrid should have told you about the first task." Harry glanced toward Hagrid's hut, but it was empty. "Yes, Professor. Hagrid told me. The first task is fighting a dragon." "Very good. Since you know that, it'll be easier." Moody nodded, his magical eye whirling. Harry felt uncomfortable as it focused on him, but Moody began anyway. "Facing a dragon, Just dodging isn't enough. You've got to learn to hide and to stall for time. Harry didn't say anything, though he inwardly disagreed. He'd been enduring the training to prove himself, not to just muddle through the task by hiding. The Triwizard judges wouldn't award high marks to someone who merely avoided danger. Moody noticed the change in Harry's expression, but didn't call him out. To the veteran Auror, a young man's defiance was a good sign, proof of energy and spirit. Moody's grin widened, the scarred face looked even more fierce. 330, pre-match interview and wand testing. Time, it seemed, slipped by unnoticed, and the end of November arrived in a rush. On the morning before the Triwizard tournament began, all the champions were summoned to a classroom on the second floor of the castle. Tradition held that the champions' wands must be inspected before the competition. The room was spacious. Most of the desks had been pushed to the back, leaving a broad, open area at the front. 3 tables covered in red velvet were set side by side at the head of the room. Behind them sat 6 high-backed chairs. Present were Mr. Ollivander, the only wand maker in the British Isles, and 5 officials. The 3 school heads, Dumbledore included, and 2 ministry men, Ludo Bagman and Barty Crouch Sr. Compared with the others' formality, Bagman, head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, looked positively eager. He could barely contain his excitement. Harry sat off to one side, quietly taking everything in. After the rigorous special training he'd undergone, he was now able to pick up tiny tells in people's behavior. Across the room, Eno had noticed Harry's attention on him and met his gaze with a guarded, almost reactive expression, like a second Moody. Surprisingly, that didn't bother Eno. Whatever Harry had lost in recklessness, he'd gained in caution, and that might well keep him out of trouble. "Champions, time is short," Bagman called, standing and grinning. "If you please, come up one by one, and don't forget, you'll have an interview with the Daily Prophet afterwards." "There's no set order," he added, mockingly helpful. "If you want to draw lots, I can arrange that now." He glanced around the room, then his eyes lingered on Eno. The others, to Bagman's eye, seemed odd. Karkaroff somber and withdrawn, Fleur elegant and fragile, and Harry hypervigilant. Eno, by contrast, looked composed. "All right, since there's no order, I'll go first." Eno rose slowly, crossed to the velvet-covered table, and handed his wand to the white-haired Mr. Ollivander. "Long time no see, Mr. Ollivander," he said. "Yes, long time," Ollivander murmured as he took the wand, peering at it closely. "I remember making this." He shook his head almost imperceptibly. "There's no need to test it, but they insisted. It's the regulations." His disapproval of the ritual was plain in his voice, audible enough for those nearby. Then, concentrating on the wand in his hand, he let it sweep through the air. From its tip bloomed a delicate elderflower. Elderwood shaft, phoenix feather core, 12 inches, fairly supple. Ollivander recited the specifications as though naming family heirlooms. He handed the wand to Bagman, who glanced at it and passed it to Barty Crouch Sr. What happened next was less bureaucratic and more theatrical. When Karkaroff took the wand from Crouch, he handled it as if it were something fragile, carefully, with both hands, and immediately handed it on to Madame Maxime. The towering Beaubaton's headmistress hardly examined the wand. Instead, she looked at the student standing before her with undisguised admiration and a little regret. Eno understood the look at once. He'd once visited the Beaubaton's carriage and politely declined some invitation, and the memory must have lingered. Maxime, still appraising him, plucked the wand up between 2 fingers and passed it to Dumbledore. The headmaster's eyes lit with childlike delight. He produced his own wand and placed the 2 virtually identical sticks on the table. The elderwood shafts were the same color and length, the grain and knots matching almost perfectly. Dumbledore slipped them out of sight for a moment, then brought them back with a mischievous smile. "Come now, guess which one is yours." Eno played along, stroking his chin. "You can't tell from the outside." Dumbledore laughed, as if a little prank had worked. Around them faces showed varying degrees of impatience. Mr. Ollivander's in particular hardened into something close to annoyance. For a wand maker, the idea that a wizard could be unsure of his own wand bordered on catastrophe. Not wanting to waste time, Eno said with a smile, "Well, I can't tell, but my wand can bloom." He tapped one of the 2 nearly identical wands, and as if on cue, small white flowers unfurled along its shaft. The joke was over. Bagman clapped his hands together and leaned forward. Mr. Swinburne, if you'll please go to the second classroom on the left, a reporter from the Daily Prophet will be waiting to interview you. At that same moment, Rita Skeeter, in the second classroom, was anything but idle. The celebrated and notorious special correspondent had made a career out of uncovering secrets, and the more she had learned about the current state of the ministry, the more uneasy she had grown. Factions and whispers had tightened into something that felt like a rope drawn around power, invisible but constraining. It sounded paranoid, until you'd been a reporter as long as she had and had seen which small shifts meant something far larger. I hope I can keep up, she muttered into the empty room. The thought that the one who had set all these wheels in motion might soon be her interview subject made her uneasy. She smoothed her hair with a shaky hand and tried to steady herself for what was to come. In an empty classroom, someone called out, "Miss Rita, you don't have to be so reserved. Just relax. This is only a normal interview." Eno looked at the annoying reporter from the original story and felt a little sentimental. In the book, she had been so arrogant. Now she seemed like a schoolgirl at her first interview, all nerves. "Okay, sir. Please have a seat." After a short moment, Rita relaxed. "Is there anything in particular I should watch out for in this interview?" Rita set the quick quotes quill to work. "Nothing. Just write whatever you like," Eno said, shaking his head. He had no intention of meddling in other people's stories, nor of exposing illegal animagi or anything like that. A great story lives in color, not just black and white. Whether it was Rita or anyone else, it was understandable that people would play their parts within certain limits. The magical world needed different perspectives, like Mr. Lovegood's The Quibbler. Black and gray were as essential to a tale as white. With a short click, the four champions finished their final group photo, and Rita's interview was done. After a brief exchange with the others, Eno walked straight back to the dormitory. He had been the first to finish and had watched Rita at work, witnessing the golden quill reporter doing what she did best. He watched, but he didn't stop it. Back in the dormitory, Eno glanced at the alarm by his bed. 11:30 a.m. Strange, between a wand check, a photo shoot, and an interview, 2 hours had slipped away. Stranger still, he hadn't felt drowsy earlier, but the moment he checked the time, a faint sleepiness crept over him. Since he was tired, he yielded to it. A nap was always necessary. Lying down, he thought about the next day. Marcus and the others had used Bagman's contacts to change some of the tournament events for spectacle's sake. The dragon in the first task was no longer meant to be only for egg snatching. Now it would be a head-on fight limited to a set time. With the event changed, the champion's states had shifted, Harry most of all. Unlike before, when a fake Moody had prodded his nerves, Harry now carried a different, taut air, watchful in the way he walked, sat, and even lay down. His thoughts wandered, and Eno's eyes closed. The dormitory fell into complete silence. While Eno slept, the Daily Prophet showed its usual efficiency. An hour after the interviews finished, a special edition about the Triwizard tournament appeared, fresh from the press. 2 sheets, 8 pages, short, but as sensational inside as any of Lockhart's tales. The front page ran a blown-up group photo of the champions, with the ministry's expectations and Minister Fudge's address beneath it. All very proper. Turn to the second page and the tone changed. There were pieces about a boy crying alone in the Gryffindor dormitory, a charming French girl who lingered instead of leaving, a dour professional seeker suspected of having his head addled by a bludger. And Harry, the local British lad who'd become a champion, received the most attention. Rita's copy, long, juicy, and often unreliable, filled 4 of the remaining 7 pages. She mixed fact and fabrication with her usual abandon. With the help of owls, the paper reached Hogwarts immediately. In the Gryffindor common room on the 8th floor, Harry folded the paper back up and set it down. Reading it left him burning with a hot, uncomfortable shame. He had answered questions plainly, answered by the book. So how could Rita dress it up into so many ugly, drawn-out insinuations? He couldn't even look up without feeling the stares all around him. "Mate, don't let it get to you," Ron said, reaching out to pat Harry's shoulder. "This is the price of fame. At least Rita's got some standards. She doesn't stoop to just anything." Ron had been looking less at the champion's supposed scandals than at Rita's technique. Recently, some enterprising fool had started buying anecdotes about the castle for real money. 2 nuts apiece. Nothing, but there was money to be made in a shortcut. If there wasn't hot news to report, he could learn from Rita and invent it instead. Fabricating rumors carried the risk. Ron remembered being pinched for making up stories about Hermione, but Rita's method offered a loophole. Attribute everything to anonymous sources. A certain Hufflepuff who wishes to remain nameless, a boy who's secretly in love with Harry. That kind of phrasing let you tell what you liked without anyone being able to sue. "I don't want to be famous," Harry said. "I just want to go to school quietly, play Quidditch now and then. Nobody ever asks how I feel." He looked at the headlines and photos with a new, bitter clarity. The Daily Prophet was kindling poured on a fire. The gossip stoked rumor until the whole castle simmered. That evening, to celebrate the first task, Gryffindor held a noisy feast. Thanks to George and Fred's generosity, sweets and drinks flowed like water. Harry was surrounded by well-wishers and forced to smile while he answered greetings. Once the celebration was in full swing, Harry slipped away unnoticed. In the bustle, no one seemed to notice him leave. A few moments later, Ginny stood and walked toward the fat lady's portrait as well. A small aside circulated among the students that day. Xiaodi's magic tip, Flagrate. It's a spell that produces lines of burning fire in the air. You can draw shapes or words with your wand, and they will hang there for a time. 332. Glory to Hogwarts, Gryffindor. The common room was loud and alive. Ginny had chased Harry away. Maybe others missed it, but Hermione had seen everything. A soft, relieved smile of blessing touched her face. Among her friends, Hermione understood clearly that Ginny's feelings for Harry were genuine. It wasn't only because of his fame as the so-called chosen one. Perhaps that had helped at first, but as Harry's renown had faded over the last 2 years, Ginny remained unchanged. Boys, Hermione thought, were always so dense, never quite reading a girl's thoughts. Today, watching Ginny send him out, she couldn't help quietly blessing her friend. After all, it was hard for a girl to pursue someone she liked. Hermione knew that well. She sat alone on a corner sofa with her legs crossed, an open can of butterbeer in hand, glancing occasionally toward the entrance. The rest of the house still buzzed in a festive mood. About half an hour later, the portrait of the fat lady swung open. Through the narrow entrance, just wide enough for 2 abreast, Harry and Ginny walked in together. This time, unlike their usual side-by-side, their hands were clasped. Hermione felt happy for Ginny, and a faint twinge of envy. "I haven't even held hands," she thought, and regretted the hesitation she'd allowed herself in the room of requirement back then. If she hadn't overthought things, if she'd simply let herself fall into his arms, maybe there would have been more than holding hands. She pursed her lips and took another small sip of butterbeer. Across the castle, the Slytherin common room was very different, quiet, reserved. Long experience with Eno had taught them he was capricious. When he wanted to be lively, he'd come out and chat or tell stories, even sing. When he didn't, he could be gone from the common room all day. Tonight felt like one of those nights. Many students sat together, but everyone tacitly kept quiet. Tomorrow morning was the Triwizard Tournament's first task. They knew it was unlikely the champion would be visible in the morning, so tonight was their last chance to offer encouragement. Yet after a long wait, the corridor to the boys' dormitories remained empty. Slytherins were not as demonstrative as Gryffindors, nor as aloof as Ravenclaws, nor as steady as Hufflepuffs. The little snakes cultivated a reserved, inward face. But that was only surface. When they felt something strongly, Slytherins could be stubbornly, even fanatically, devoted. Tonight everyone wanted to send their best wishes, but no one dared be the first to knock. They had been sitting an hour already, and no one left. "Is he not coming? Didn't anyone see him go back to the dorm, or is he asleep?" Daphne's voice was very soft, but in the hush it carried and stirred the room. "What do you think?" Pansy replied with a light chuckle, turning her gaze toward the boys' corridor. "There are some people you can always trust, and then there are those you can not only trust, but entrust yourselves to completely." Pansy didn't lower her voice on purpose. She spoke plainly, as if it were an everyday remark. Her words landed with weight. Everyone present, except the new first years felt the same. This wasn't blind adoration, but the kind of trust born of proven deeds. Many in the room had seen Eno keep his promises. Harper Wick was one such believer. A half-blood who'd arrived at Hogwarts in 1992 and been sorted into Slytherin, Harper had risked everything at last year's Malfoy Manor banquet when the moving picture mirror made an appearance, investing 2 whole galleons, the years of his saved pocket money, into a shared venture. The dividends had already tripled his original sum. Even with such profit, he stayed true to his promise and sat quietly in the common room. If he had to wait another hour or 2, he would do it. People like Harper were by no means rare in Slytherin. Even those who hadn't been at the banquet later contributed through other channels and received their returns. That predictability and loyalty reinforced the house's cohesion. The small stir Daphne caused was quickly absorbed. Pansy nodded slightly, pleased with how everyone had behaved. Slytherin, she felt, should be united and grateful. Then, faint footsteps sounded from the boys' corridor. "Sorry I'm late. I was held up. Didn't mean to make anyone wait." Eno stepped into the room. The common room was fuller than he'd expected. Students were packed in every corner, some 2 or 3 squeezed onto a single armchair. Salazar Slytherin could never have imagined that, 1,000 years later, so many young witches and wizards would gather here at once. Eno raised his right hand in a small salute. "Thank you all for your support. Glory to Hogwarts." He spoke without flourish, his tone calm as if commenting on the weather. Still, even a quiet declaration can sweep a room. In unison, many voices answered, soft but unwavering. "Glory to Hogwarts." One person's calm voice might be barely audible. Dozens, even hundreds, speaking together, even quietly, became an undeniable chorus of belief. Later, back in his dormitory, Eno leaned back in his chair and thought about the scene. Watching the common room had made him understand, in part, how Tom Riddle had become Lord Voldemort. Riddle's tragic childhood was a factor, of course, but schools could change a person's outlook too. A teenager with the emotional maturity of a child, suddenly adored and admired by many, could easily grow conceited and arrogant. If that teenager was an orphan and already psychologically twisted, the results could be ruinous. It wasn't Slytherin's fault. If anyone wanted a cause, it was simply that Riddle's own character hadn't been able to bear a reputation larger than himself. 333. Vibrant Valley, Professor McGonagall's Instructions. The next morning came early. By the end of November, the Scottish Highlands were below freezing, but that did nothing to dampen the excitement in the castle. The students were up at dawn. They washed, dressed, and packed the gear they had prepared. Enchanted banners, colorful fireworks, and of course, Quidditch binoculars. Perhaps because of the World Cup, more than 80% of the students carried Quidditch-spec binoculars. The ones who didn't fell into 2 groups: a few Muggle-borns who couldn't afford or find magical specs, and a small number who carried pricier gear instead, enchanted cameras and film mirrors. Colin was in the latter category. He had both. Last year on the train, he'd made a name for himself, filming Eno and catching a Dementor from an incredible angle, a set of 12 shots that not only earned him payment, but also the favor of the Daily Prophet. Today, Colin wore several hats: freelance for the Daily Prophet, camera operator, and, if the rumor was true, he'd had a commission from Malfoy, who'd visited 2 days ago. The 3 assignments had sent him sprinting toward the Quidditch pitch without breakfast, determined to secure the best vantage point. He thought he'd arrived early, only to find dozens of others already setting up, and not just a few. From their equipment and serious expressions, Colin deduced they were new rivals. The thought made him nervous. More and more people wanted to break into news photography. He found himself reconsidering Malfoy's offer. Up in the Slytherin dormitory, after washing, Eno did something uncharacteristic. He used the house privilege and had a house elf bring his breakfast to the common room. Draco lounged by the clock, restless and talkative. "Marcus has already arranged 12 people," Draco said, eyes flicking at the alarm. "They'll film from different angles. I've got some staff lined up too. If everything goes well, our first monthly issue could be out by Christmas." "Oh, right," Draco rambled, his excitement making him more verbose than usual. "Have you finished the prep you mentioned last night? Honestly, you don't need to overthink it. Focus on getting a high score. That's my advice, anyway. Eno smiled and rolled up his sleeve, revealing an ice blue bracelet curled around his wrist. Don't worry, it was taken care of last night. Scores matter, but the spectacle is what counts. He picked up a napkin and wiped the corner of his mouth. The first bout with the dragon had looked like something that could be ended with a sectum sempra, but Eno had thought about it for a long time. The contest wasn't meant to terrify. He had deliberately set aside one-hit kill spells and the Boggart's fear-inducing methods. After considering his options, he had narrowed his plan to ice and snow magic combined with transfiguration. A snake-shaped bracelet? An alchemical tool? Draco peered at it, puzzled. The bracelet looked like a piece of art, about a third of an inch in thickness, its head and tail joined in a perfect loop. Alchemical tool? Maybe, Eno said, but I think it's alive. He stroked the uneven scales and let his mind drift back to last night's strange, dreamlike experience. When he had decided on ice and snow and transfiguration, he'd pictured a 70-foot ice anaconda battling a dragon, a spectacle that would score high for size and visual impact. He'd even thought to disguise it so it could enter the arena more easily. Then he had gone into the sanctuary and discovered it had changed. The automata and alchemical puppets Nicholas Flamel once gave him, which had needed exchanges of vitality to move, were running around as if newly animated. Maple and oak trunks in the valley had developed faint faces. Even the lifeless ice-snow anaconda, his transfiguration work, now had lively eyes. The change didn't stop there. Every blade of grass, every tree, even the White House and its tables, chairs, candlesticks, and teacups seemed on the verge of stirring to life. Eno traced the cause of the change to one new addition, a rainbow river that flowed across the valley's sky. It wasn't mere decoration. It poured a kind of living light into the sanctuary, warmth, brightness, and a vitality that didn't follow the rules of ordinary sunlight. That vitality came, he discovered, from the stones Rohan's children had collected. Because it was born from those stones, the energy was playful and uninhibited, like a child seeing everything as animate, singing flowers, chatting teacups, runaway candlesticks, mischievous stools. For now, Nicholas's puppets were the most active, but Eno knew the place would only grow more wondrous with time. He pulled his sleeve down, covering the bracelet that the anaconda had transformed into, then glanced at the clock. "I have to go," he said. "Professor McGonagall should already be in the Great Hall." He patted Draco's shoulder and headed out, feeling a thrill of novelty. It was like a storyteller stepping into his own tale. On the way to the Great Hall, he greeted passing students with a smile. He paused at a corner when several Beauxbatons girls spotted him, gushed for an autograph, and insisted on a group photo, the usual harmless fuss. Then he pushed through the doors. Professor McGonagall and Harry were waiting. "Thank heavens! I thought you might have overslept. Harry arrived quite early," she said. She looked as composed as ever, but her fingers kept tucking stray hairs behind her ears, betraying the tension beneath. "Sorry, Professor McGonagall." Eno bowed slightly and nodded to Harry. "Don't be nervous," McGonagall said, attempting a calm smile as she adjusted her hair again. "I'll be watching the whole match, but do not try to be brave." Her tone shifted, stern and earnest. She fixed Harry with a look. As head of Gryffindor, she had noticed something different in him this time. A drive that, while normally admirable, would be dangerous facing a 5-time-sized dragon. She did not want Gryffindor to produce another Sir Cadogan 1,000 years hence. "Remember, don't be reckless. If danger or an accident occurs, give me time to intervene and rescue you. That is my final request." Her voice trembled slightly on the last words, but she made sure each one was heard. "Now, both of you, follow me. The champions will enter from the other side." Under Professor McGonagall's lead, they bypassed the Quidditch pitch's main entrance and arrived at a secluded side door. "You must go in by yourselves. Bagman is inside." Outside the door, McGonagall fixed them with a steady look. "Finally, good luck." "Thank you." Unlike Harry, who felt nervous, Eno nodded seriously and went in first. They passed through a long, narrow corridor that allowed only one person at a time. Then the space opened, and they stepped into a roomy tent. "Ha ha! Our Hogwarts champion is here. Come in quickly. There's less than a quarter of an hour left for preparations." Ludo Bagman, head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, rose to greet them with a broad smile. Although middle-aged, he seemed 10 years younger at the moment. "Thank you," Eno replied politely and sat on a bench nearby. He had no intention of wasting time on small talk with Bagman. The man was a judge, and looking too familiar might draw suspicion. Bagman was not slow to notice this, and reading Eno's restraint, turned toward the passage. "Ah, our fourth champion is here too, Harry Potter." He greeted Harry with the same, if anything greater, enthusiasm. Crumb and Fleur exchanged a quiet glance, both frowning slightly. Harry, faced with Bagman's effusive welcome, felt an inexplicable irritation. He disliked being called the fourth champion. It made him feel like an afterthought. He forced down his annoyance, nodded, and sat on another bench. "All right, now that everyone is here, I'll go over the basics. Though I suppose this is redundant, that's how the process works." Bagman chirped, undeterred by Harry's coolness, his face positively pleased. "That's the situation. For your safety, the hourglass will be timed for a maximum of half an hour. Of course, you may give up at any time during that period. As soon as you signal, 10 experienced dragon handlers outside the arena will rush in. You can be absolutely assured of that." While explaining the rules and emergency procedures, Bagman reached behind him and pulled out a small canvas bag. "Now, let's draw lots. This will determine your order of appearance and which dragon species you face." When the bag appeared, the other three champions visibly paled. That was understandable. The oldest of them was only 17. No matter how good at school they were, being drawn against a Class 5 dragon was unnerving. Eno stood up. "I'll go first, if you don't mind." It was a spur-of-the-moment decision. Going first meant the pressure of opening the show, but it also forced the contest to begin before nerves could build into something worse. Bagman didn't care either way. He got a cut of ticket sales, so the order made no difference to him. The other three champions, hearing someone volunteer, nodded in relief. Eno smiled and stepped to Bagman. He reached into the bag and drew out a palm-sized dragon token. "Oh ho, a Norwegian Ridgeback," Bagman announced, then looked to the others. "Champions, for fairness, I'll ask one last time. Do you accept this draw, or would you like to draw again?" The Norwegian Ridgeback, one of the fiercest dragons, resembled the Hungarian horntail, but lacked the tail spike. Bagman's question was mostly ceremonial, but the other champions had clearly done their homework. None objected. "All right. Good luck, Mr. Swinburne." Bagman then handed out the remaining bags. Harry, as if fate decreed it, drew the Hungarian horntail, and he was set to go second. Even the usually blithe Bagman showed a flicker of sympathy. "Now I must go and perform my duties as judge. You will enter the arena in order when I give the command." He lifted the tent flap and left. A few minutes later, Bagman's voice came from outside the tent. "Now, let's welcome our first champion, the Hogwarts champion, Mr. Eno Swinburne." Amid cheers, Eno stepped out, every eye in the stands fixed on him. He smiled and waved as he took in the sight of the Norwegian Ridgeback being held by handlers in the arena and a huge hourglass levitating above, its sands ready to fall. "Champion, prepare!" Bagman's voice rang out. "Begin." The dragon was unchained, and the hourglass began to run. "Winter is coming," Eno called, wand flicking lightly. At his command, countless snowflakes spiraled down from the sky. A cold mist rolled along the ground. The ice and snow magic he'd inherited from the White Witch unfurled beautifully. In moments, the arena was transformed into a world of white. The frost spread so far, the distant Forbidden Forest looked dusted with snow. Everywhere the eye could see was whiteness. Sensing the threat, the Norwegian Ridgeback launched its attack. Although held by a long chain that limited its flight height, it could still get 30 feet up and unleash a gout of searing dragon fire. Eno did not bother with verbose incantations. He flicked his wand again. The snowflakes, as if answering a conductor, changed from gentle drift to a raging blizzard. What had been decorative snowfall became a violent, focused storm. Countless flakes, driven by biting wind, surged toward the dragonfire. It was a clash of ice and flame. The snow fell harder. The dragon's flames licked at the cold, melting some of it, but the relentless blizzard wore them down. Eventually, the fire surrendered to the avalanche of ice. The stands erupted in cheers. Eno didn't even glance at the dragon as its flames faltered. He smiled and waved to the crowd, an affected but necessary gesture. He was stalling. Only a few minutes had passed, and he needed to preserve the dragon's strength so the spectacle would have impact later. The crowd cheered louder, and for the moment, the battle of ice and fire had gone exactly as he intended. A dragon rated 5x by the Ministry of Magic is not something ordinary adult wizards handle alone. Its thick, armored hide resists most spells. Its bulk, claws, and teeth, and searing fire are the stuff of nightmares. And yet, just minutes ago, someone had casually answered a dragon's attack in front of all the teachers and students of Hogwarts and the delegations from Bosbatons and Durmstrang. Snow fell, turning the world silver and white. In that pure, hushed scene, Eno strolled slowly, as if admiring the view. His plain robe, perfectly cut and trimmed in Slytherin's bright green, lent a flash of color to the landscape. He moved with a grace that made an ordinary student robe seem elegant and flowing, like an understated evening gown. On the stands, most of the Slytherin boys had silently put down their telescopes to check their own robes, confirming they were the same model. Their faces showed a range of reactions. In the arena, after Eno had blocked the dragon's blast once, the Norwegian Ridgeback opposite him had grown cautious. He pursed his lips almost involuntarily. He had been careful enough not to strike back, and yet this was the result. The dragon, instead of pressing an advantage, had curled to one side in a defensive posture. Eno shook his head, a trace of disappointment showing in his clear amber eyes. Though the movement was slight, all around the stadium people had telescopes, and the image of the lone boy, delicate-featured and slightly let down, was visible everywhere. Girls of every house felt a small collective pang. It hardly mattered to them that the dragon's behavior actually betrayed fear. Their verdict was already unanimous. Blame the dragon. Stupid dragon, some murmured. Why can't it just behave? Though Eno could not hear the whispers from the stands, he understood the dragon's mindset, extreme caution. But once he confirmed the beast was merely wary and not truly terrified, he relaxed. He strolled to within about 30 feet of the dragon and sat down, entirely at ease beneath the beast's watchful eyes. At the same time, a high-backed armchair rose from the snow, carved of pale blue frost like crystal. Eno settled into it, chin resting on a hand, and watched the dragon with no defenses. Snowflakes danced around him like spirits and followed his movement. From the stands, Colin felt a prickle of worry. If every champion performed like this, the film he'd brought might not be enough. The concern lasted only a moment. The moving picture film in his hand gave him new confidence. Worst case, he thought, he'd ignore the Daily Prophet. Images were replacing print for Muggle or wizarding media alike. For the first time, the idea that newspapers might be obsolete flickered across his mind. Back in the arena, Eno had already abandoned every possible defensive posture, even making what could be read as a provocative gesture, but the Norwegian Ridgeback remained immovable. With such caution and steadiness, even Mad-Eye Moody might throw up his hands. The magically drawn hourglass hovering in the air continued to drain, time slipping by, and the snow on the ground thickened. It was a slow, slightly tedious interlude, yet none of the 5 judges, whether on the stands or the main guest platform, seemed bored. Dumbledore, for instance, levitated several snowflakes to his table and quietly built a little 5-inch snowman, playing alone with a childlike smile. With the dragon so steady, Eno couldn't very well use anything overtly aggressive. That would be disappointingly trite. But he still wanted spectacle. After a moment's thought, he snapped his fingers. A miniature ice castle rose on the arena floor, about 20 feet tall and matching the dragon in footprint. Through the telescopes, many young wizards instantly recognized the shape of Hogwarts. Towers, the main building, outer walls, covered bridges, greenhouses, all in perfect miniature. The castle's main gate creaked open, and out marched tiny wizards no more than 5 inches tall. Some came in groups, some rode miniature brooms, and they rushed toward the dragon. They drew wands no longer than toothpicks and launched a furious assault. Pea-sized snowballs pelted the dragon's scales and bounced off harmlessly, but the sight was irresistible. Little figures besieging a giant, like something out of Gulliver's Travels. On the guest platform, Dumbledore looked from the lifelike scene to the tiny snowman by his plate, then casually nudged the snowman aside. Madame Maxime glanced at the discarded figure and, with a barely perceptible twitch, turned away. only to tap the table. The snowman wobbled and then, impossibly, aimed itself at Karkaroff. What had begun as an intense, tense Triwizard tournament quietly shifted. A cheerful mood spread through the stands. The dragon either was an oddity or extraordinarily wise. However it judged, it stood its ground like a mountain, seemingly content to stay that way as long as the timer allowed. Motion and stillness fed each other. While the dragon chose immobility, Eno filled the arena with change. More ice and snow figures sprang up, and even the anaconda that had been coiled on his wrist shrank to a 1-foot snake and joined the fun. The familiar slapstick duo, Clumsy Tom and Crafty Jerry, made their appearance too, and the stands erupted into laughter. From the initial gasp of excitement to the current hearty amusement had passed only about a quarter of an hour. The hourglass hanging in midair was only half empty. 336, ending with the second warrior. Time always seemed to fly when people were laughing. Before half the hourglass had emptied, the arena had already turned into a fairy tale spectacle. Ice flowers bloomed across the field, 2-foot-tall humping willows swayed, swarms of pixies darted through the air, puffskeins tumbled about, and even the puppet wizards that had come out of the castle were now riding brooms in a miniature Quidditch match above the crowd. It was as if stories had come to life, a visual feast for the wizards who craved entertainment. Clang! As the last grains of sand fell, a clear bell rang out across the sky. "The first task is over!" Bagman's voice echoed, and applause rose from the stands. This time the cheering was quieter, more sincere. People genuinely seemed to be applauding the champion. Many rose to their feet in a show of respect as Bagman's voice died away. Eno slowly stood from the high-backed chair, turned, and waved to the crowd. At that moment, the dragon that had seemed docile suddenly flared. Its 60-foot body lunged forward, catching everyone off guard, not just the wizards in the stands, but the professors in the VIP box and the dragon handlers outside the arena. "Watch out! Behind you!" Bagman began, then cut off mid-sentence. A 70-foot anaconda, longer than the dragon, had coiled itself tightly around the enraged Norwegian ridgeback. It opened its mouth in a silent threat. Unlike ordinary snakes, anacondas have 4 to 6 hooked rows of teeth. Facing that gaping maw and the dense array of sharp teeth, the Norwegian ridgeback resignedly lowered its head. Eno had not looked back once. Though he had seemed casual, he had been on guard against this unusual dragon all along. Fortunately, the dragon lived up to his expectations. It finally showed spirit, bringing the task to a perfect close and giving the anaconda its moment in the arena. The earlier adjustments he'd made had not been in vain. Eno smiled and waved his wand. The snowflakes in the sky gradually stilled. Behind him, the two colossal creatures struggled, an anaconda with its ferocious, gaping jaws pressing on the dragon. In the stands, Colin was busier than ever. One hand steadied the camera to his eye, while the other snapped photo after photo. It was a strange but coordinated flurry of activity. After the task, the dragon handlers hurried into the arena and led away the exhausted Norwegian ridgeback. The ice and snow were cleared promptly. The Triwizard tournament prided itself on fairness and neutrality. A few minutes later, Bagman rose in the VIP box and announced loudly, "The scores from the 5 judges are in." The champion representing Hogwarts, Mr. Eno Swinburne, has a final score of a perfect 50 points. Applause and cheers swelled once more, louder even than before. Eno quietly left the arena as Bagman called for the next champion. Outside the tent, Eno brushed past Harry and called encouragement. "You can do it! Your Hogwarts courage, too!" Harry nodded and strode toward the arena. The Hungarian horntail that faced him was nearly 65 feet long, with a row of vicious spikes along its back. Its tail was different from the Norwegian's. The end of it bristled with bone spikes like a brutal flail. Though its movement had been restrained, the dragon's thick tail kept pounding the ground with heavy thuds. Each swing made Harry's face grow more solemn. Moody had taught him a few tricks, but standing in front of the colossal beast, Harry couldn't help wondering if those spells would merely irritate it. In the VIP box, Madame Maxime and Karkaroff visibly relaxed at Harry's tense expression. They owed a private gratitude to whoever had arranged an extra champion. Without that, there wouldn't have been a second champion, and the scoring would have been different. Outside the arena, Professor McGonagall gripped her wand, ready to intervene at a moment's notice. It wasn't a lack of faith in the dragon handlers. She simply didn't trust that a boy under 15, inattentive in class and often having his homework copied for him, should be up against a ferocious horntail. It felt closer to an assassination than a test. Time passed. As Harry entered the arena, bagmen called out, "Champions, prepare, begin." The dragon handlers released the horntail's restraints, and the magical hourglass in the sky began to run. The contest started anew. Young wizards in the stands leaned forward, eager for Harry's performance. Though Harry's schoolwork had been unremarkable, tales about him since childhood, about the boy who lived, meant many at Hogwarts still treated him differently. How long that special treatment would last was uncertain, but for the moment it continued. Freed, the horntail lifted its head and roared. Harry raised his wand and spoke 2 spells in quick succession. Vaporize, Protego. The spells made Professor McGonagall exhale in relief. Even Snape, on the other side of the stands, seemed to relax. Against such an overwhelming presence, concealment and defense were the wisest choices. Vaporize, a disruptive auxiliary charm, could yield unexpected effects in a confined space. As Harry's voice faded, several wisps of gray mist like smoke appeared and began to writhe, gathering and expanding as if given life. Inside the tent, Harry had considered many approaches, but facing the dragon directly, he chose Mad-Eye Moody's advice. Use magic to disrupt the dragon's vision, and rely on agile dodging to buy time. The idea of direct confrontation had long since been abandoned. The Triwizard Arena had been set up on the Quidditch pitch. As a Quidditch field, it wasn't huge, an oval about 800 feet long and 500 feet wide, but the surrounding towering stands trapped the air, making it easy for mist to collect. Only a few seconds after Harry's spell, a gray fog had spread out in a rough circle of several dozen meters around him. It expanded quickly at first, then slowed as if it had little stamina left. Even so, the shroud was more than enough to hide him. Unlike the guarded caution the Hungarian horntail had shown in its dragon task, this dragon, perhaps because of species differences, didn't try to test Harry with flames first. It beat its wings and lunged straight for the smoke. Inside the cloud, Harry moved like a man possessed. He dodged, rolled, and leapt, using the aura-evasive techniques Moody had drilled into him. Even when the horntail belched flame, he found a safe spot and then narrowly escaped with more rolls. But he'd overlooked a crucial factor. This was an open competition. The fog that hid him from the dragon also ruined the crowd's view. The previous task had been a spectacle. Now everything was blurred. The students in the stands who'd come for a good show were irritable. Some shouted. A few clear yells of "coward" drifted to his ears. His endurance was being sapped not only by the physical effort, time in the enchanted hourglasses was draining, but by the rising irritation in the stands. If he kept this up, he could have lasted the full half hour and won respectable marks, he told himself. Instead, the mockery gnawed at him. He wanted to find whoever had called him a coward and make them feel what it was to be threatened by a dragon. But he had to keep moving, and the fog around him had begun to thin. 5 minutes later, the horntail unleashed a final, sweeping jet of flame that scattered the smoke. Binoculars popped up all over the stands. What people saw, though, wasn't the triumphant figure they'd expected. Harry staggered into view looking beat up, hair tangled, face smeared with dirt, the corner of his school robe singed black. He looked ridiculous. Laughter spread like wildfire. A single suppressed snicker turned into open guffaws. Humiliated, Harry lowered his head and looked at his wand. He'd trained so hard, taken all the risks to prove himself as Hogwarts champion, and now he was a joke. For a few frozen heartbeats, he simply stood there, the laughter stinging. The horntail, seeing the small, helpless figure it had been toying with, made no allowances. It reared and charged, wings beating the air at terrifying speed. Snape and McGonagall were already at the edge of the arena, wands raised. The experienced dragon handlers surged forward as well, and Fawkes the Phoenix swooped in toward Harry. But the laughter, the exhaustion, the humiliation, the anger pooling inside him, all converged and snapped something inside Harry. The fury spread through him like wildfire. The world narrowed until there was nothing but the dragon and the thing that had brought him here. If it weren't for that monster, he thought, if it weren't for them laughing, Avada Kedavra, A green flash shot from his wand. Time seemed to halt. The beam struck the horntail. It crashed to the ground, motionless. The laughter died in an instant. No one had expected it. For the first time in front of a stadium full of people, a student had openly used an unforgivable curse and had killed a dragon with it. Draco Malfoy's face drained of color. His lips trembled. He was terrified and secretly relieved that he'd followed Eno's advice to keep his distance from Scarhead this year. Others in the stands sat frozen, shocked and uncertain. The VIP box erupted. Barty Crouch Sr., former head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and now head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, rose to his feet. "This is a breach of British ministry law," he barked. "He openly used an unforgivable curse. Harry Potter must be taken into custody. The Triwizard Tournament is suspended." Albert Runcorn, no, wait, Bagman. Bagman pushed forward, scandalized. "Hold it, Barty. He's still a student. Even if he knows the killing curse, he couldn't have." He stopped himself. He didn't object to Harry being detained, but suspending the tournament mid-competition would be disastrous. "Do what you like," Crouch snapped. "I'm taking that student now. The ministry's law will not be trampled." Bagman tried to temper him. "The law's important, yes, but let's discuss this after the competition. We can't just—" Barty ignored him and turned to Dumbledore, waiting for the headmaster's word. No one in England could afford to ignore Dumbledore's opinion. The arena held its breath as the old man rose, the whole affair hanging on what he would say next. 338. Appeasement and Procrastination. The Killing Curse, one of the three unforgivable curses, eclipsed the Imperius and the Cruciatus in infamy. Its signature green beam meant instant death, and for those who saw it unleashed, it left nothing but dread. Plenty of spells could kill, some household charms even, if miscast, but none produced the same single cold sensory certainty as the Killing Curse. At the head table, Dumbledore stood motionless, apparently ignoring Barty Crouch Sr.'s questions. His gaze was fixed on Harry in the arena. Only when Snape and Professor McGonagall entered the field did Dumbledore's expression relax a little. Madame Maxime and Karkaroff sensibly kept their silence. This was not their affair to judge. After a long moment, Dumbledore finally spoke. "The Goblet of Fire's decision cannot be altered. Surely you know that, Barty." "I know that," Barty Crouch snapped, feeling the pressure in Dumbledore's quiet. "But the public needs an explanation. Even if it was only a dragon, too many people saw it." He looked around the stands. He did not know exactly how many spectators had witnessed the event, but the Daily Prophet would have it all by tomorrow, or even by that afternoon. If the ministry did not explain itself, the ban on unforgivable curses would be as good as scrap, without any real force behind it. "Let us wait until the first task is over," Dumbledore said. "Then Harry and I will go to the ministry together, and the matter can be taken to the Wizengamot." There was an unarguable authority in his tone. Barty inclined his head. Whether from delay or deference, with Dumbledore speaking, he would show respect. He settled back into his seat and resumed his role as judge. Once Harry had been led from the arena by McGonagall and Snape, Dumbledore lifted his voice with a sonorous charm. A small accident occurred. One champion took extreme measures when faced with a deadly threat. His amplified voice washed over the Quidditch pitch and calmed the anxious students. "We will deal with this appropriately, but the competition must continue. We look forward to Miss Delacour and Mr. Crumb doing their best." Language in the wizarding world was itself a kind of magic. A few carefully chosen words from Dumbledore had the same effect as a charm. The panic dissolved as easily as it had arisen. Boys in the stands pictured Fleur's beauty. Others pictured Crumb at the World Cup. Bagman, as ever the showman, seized the moment. "Now, please welcome our third champion." Inside the French tent, Fleur rose, nervous. She had no idea what had happened outside, but Dumbledore's public explanation had reached them. An accident, extreme measures, a lethal threat. Crumb would be all right. Quidditch players accepted injury as part of the job, but Fleur had never faced anything like this. Still, she could not hide forever. She took a breath, opened the flap, and stepped out. On the other side of the camp, Eno also stood. He glanced at Crumb. "I'm going to see what's happened. Good luck." He, too, left through the small door he had entered by. Although Dumbledore had called it an accident, Eno suspected it was not that simple. The story had been altered, and everyone else had already accepted the altered version. No one knew whether the current Lord Voldemort was the paranoid, disfigured tyrant of later years or the coherent, calculating soul that had once possessed Quirrell. The latter was the more worrying type. Villains with minds were far more dangerous than those who raged without thought. If it were the Quirrell-era soul, Eno's mind wandered back to the corridor conversations they'd had then. Voldemort had been cruel, yes, but rational and persuasive. The lines between what had happened and what might have been were getting blurred. The Triwizard Tournament, suddenly, felt like mere garnish on life, rather than anything essential. Lost in thought, Eno left the pitch and made his way to the hospital wing. Hogwarts, hospital wing. Harry lay on a bed, still dazed and not quite sure what had happened. He had a vague memory of anger, of directing it toward the Hungarian Horntail, and after that, things grew hazy. Professor McGonagall looked worried and tired. Snape stood apart, unreadable. No major injuries, Madame Pomfrey reported after a thorough examination, or at least nothing obvious. He is exhausted and needs rest. I'll prepare some restorative potions. Thank goodness, McGonagall said, visibly relieved. She leaned toward Harry. You heard her. Rest now, Harry. Don't think about anything. Leave everything to me. McGonagall turned to Snape. You stay and watch him. I need to fulfill my duties as deputy headmistress and speak with the judges. With that, she left, decisive as ever. The hospital wing fell into an awkward hush, occupied only by Harry and Snape. Neither seemed willing to break it. Harry did not know what to say. Snape's thoughts were elsewhere, fixed on that last killing curse, clean, decisive, instantaneous. It had been offered with absolute confidence, without the slightest hesitation, as if whomever it struck would calmly present themselves to be ended. Snape had seen that particular certainty only in one person. Harry, for his part, was beginning to fret about marks. What would the judges think of his performance? Time ticked on in the quiet. About 15 minutes after McGonagall left, Eno arrived and gave a soft knock. He paused at the doorway to take in the scene, then knocked twice more before pushing the door gently and stepping in. 339. Eno's backup plan. The worst-case scenario, Eno entered the hospital wing without looking at Harry. He went straight to Snape. There was no particular reason. The headmaster looked a little unsteady at the moment, but Snape stood alone in the corner, apparently calm. His eyes, usually empty and indifferent, were suddenly full of feeling. Professor, are you all right? The sudden voice in the quiet ward startled Snape. He did not answer at once. Instead, he closed his eyes and held them shut for a long moment. I'm fine, he said finally, his voice as even as ever. I forgot to congratulate you on your perfect score. Heh, it's just a game, nothing to fuss over, Eno chuckled, giving Harry a quick look. He nodded once and faced Snape. Some things don't need to be dwelt on. Magic makes miracles. There's always a solution. Eno thought of all the kindness Snape had shown since he'd arrived. Potion tutoring, the Half-Blood Prince's notes that had helped him more than once. Especially Sectum Sempra from those notes, its effects were still impressive. Favors like that had to be repaid. After a moment of serious thought, he added, Professor, trust me, there's nothing that can't be solved. For a flash of a second, the worst-case idea flashed through his mind, and with it, the most perfect plan. Kill Harry and revive him with the ice flower. Yes, after resurrection, Harry would be bound to the sanctuary, but that was preferable to being controlled by Voldemort or being assimilated by the lingering Horcrux soul. Eno knew the story was called Harry Potter and that Harry was the protagonist, but he also knew how hollow that idea could be in practice. What could a 10-year-old be expected to do? He wasn't born wise. Even at the end of the tale, he would only be 17. Still, because everyone revolved around this half-grown child, Dumbledore paralyzed between destroying Voldemort and protecting Harry, Voldemort bizarrely obsessed with duels rather than a full assault, Snape willing to bend to whoever could save Harry, Eno thought of a simple solution. Cut the knot if the rope is tied too tight. Removing Harry early would solve everything at the root. The hospital wing remained quiet. When Eno said that magic could create miracles and that no problem was unsolvable, Snape's face eased considerably. It wasn't that the words themselves were magical. They reminded him of the Wolfsbane potion, how the werewolf problem that had plagued so many had ultimately been treated with a potion. That thought steadied Snape further. Yes, you're right. Nothing is unsolvable, he murmured, as if speaking to himself. Eno said nothing more. He didn't yet know where the Goblet of Fire business would lead. All he could do was take it step by step. At that moment, the ward door opened again. Now this is how one should visit a patient. After all, Harry needs rest, not company, Madame Pomfrey announced as she entered with a vial in hand. Seeing Eno and Snape standing to the side pleased her. Drink your medicine, child. I added a sedative. Drink it and get a good night's sleep. Don't think about anything. You're recovering now. Harry stared at the potion in the glass bottle, a murky, unidentified liquid. Normally, the sight of it would have disgusted him, but he took it without hesitation and drank. Bitterness and a sour, rotting tang flooded his mouth, yet instead of recoiling, he felt an odd fondness for the taste. A few minutes later, the potion took hold. The only sound from the bed was soft breathing. Eno watched Harry sleep and felt strange. The boy carried the title of protagonist, and everyone seemed to act for his sake, yet Harry himself had always been passive, taking fame and hardship in silence. It had been that way since the beginning. If not for the scar, he might never have been famous, Eno thought and sighed. He turned to the window. The humping willow swayed in the winter wind. From the distant Quidditch pitch came the faint noise of celebration. Eno looked down at the lightning-shaped scar on Harry's brow again, then stepped away and vanished from his spot. When he reappeared, he held an old bronze oil lamp. A Horcrux, he reasoned, was a created magical object. Special, yes, but still something made. If an oil lamp could reveal and pierce the protections of a time-turner, then illuminating and disrupting a Horcrux shouldn't be impossible. With that thought, Eno approached the sleeping Harry, under Snape's surprised gaze. At the same time, the first task of the Triwizard Tournament was drawing to a close. After Krumm's final evasive maneuver, the enchanted hourglass suspended over the arena ran out of sand. The 5 judges conferred and handed out their scores. Krumm's skill as a seeker had paid off. His final total beat Fleur's by 7 points, finishing at an impressive 45. Applause and cheers followed, and the first task ended. The young wizards and witches in the stands began to leave in orderly clusters, eager to talk over the spectacle. As the crowd thinned and the show elements wound down, the action in the main box was just beginning. All right, I'm taking Harry Potter with me, Barty Crouch Sr. declared, standing and loosening his tie. Professor McGonagall stepped forward without hesitation. My student needs rest. He's injured. No one is taking him away. Barty did not argue with her directly. Instead, he turned to Dumbledore with a questioning look. He wasn't concerned that Dumbledore might break his promise. Such commitments had been made in front of the other schools' heads, but he wanted an explanation. Ludo Bagman, uncharacteristically, did not object. Though he didn't oversee the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, as a senior ministry official, there were limits to what he could ignore, especially in public. At the high table, the room finally emptied. After Professor McGonagall made her position perfectly clear, Madame Maxime turned and left without a backward glance. Whatever dispute there might be between Hogwarts and the British Ministry of Magic was not her concern as headmistress of Beauxbatons. Lingering would only look like she was there for the spectacle. Her departure made Karkaroff's continued presence awkward, and once those 2 foreign dignitaries had gone, Ludo Bagman let out a visible sigh of relief. With only their own people present, everything could be discussed behind closed doors. To me, this is nothing, Bagman said easily. Just a dragon killed. No one died. The only possible issue is that an unforgivable was used in public, but given the circumstances and Potter's fame, a trip to the ministry would be a formality and shouldn't affect the tournament. Listen to me, he pleaded. This is not worth making a scene over. Barty, you don't need to be so worked up. Under Bagman's coaxing, Barty Crouch Sr. reluctantly agreed to compromise. All right, I'll stay here until Harry Potter has fully recovered, he announced. McGonagall's eyes narrowed instantly. If you intend to stay here, you'll need to bring a tent of your own. The castle kitchens only provide for Hogwarts teachers and students. Bagman moved quickly to smooth things over. Oh, Professor McGonagall, don't worry about that. Barty has a house elf, and besides, he might not take well to school food. The remark, meant to give his colleague an easy out, had the opposite effect. Barty looked momentarily bewildered. I have a house elf? He glanced around as if realizing his mistake, then forced a laugh. Never mind, it's not important. The matter's settled. I'll wait until Potter recovers. Once a shaky consensus had been reached between the ministry and the school, people began to disperse. In the hospital wing, however, not everyone was at ease. Under the glow of the bronze oil lamp, Eno stared at Harry's forehead. From the scar, a thin, black smoke drifted upward, the same kind of malignant mist he had seen when Ravenclaw's diadem had been damaged. The difference was subtle but worrying. Whereas the diadem's smoke had carried an obvious corrupting lure, the smoke here seemed restrained, quieter, as if some powerful force were holding it in. Even so, any comparison to a Horcrux's corruption was disquieting. Eno knew Harry had been surrounded by that kind of malice for a long time. If nothing else, he owed his survival to the protection Lily had given him when she died. Seeing the smoke appear tamed but present made him uneasy. He murmured to himself, "This shouldn't be happening." "Which way did you see it?" Severus Snape's voice came from the doorway. He moved to the bed and read the concern on Eno's face. His student never made idle jokes or imagined sensations. When Eno described the restrained malice, Snape's expression tightened. "So it's the residue of Voldemort's malice, then? Contained for the moment?" he asked. "Yes," Eno replied. "It's restrained and won't do any major harm for now." Snape did not press further, but the question that hung in the air was obvious. Why had this happened now? Eno shook his head. He had an uneasy suspicion that something had been overlooked. With the known number of Horcruxes apparently unchanged, such an unusual manifestation should not have occurred. He reminded himself that during the summer, Dumbledore had, out of caution, taken custody of the remaining 2 Horcruxes to prevent any accidental destruction and subsequent chain reactions. That made the current situation all the more puzzling. After a long moment, Eno rose. "I need to run some more tests," he said. Snape nodded. As Eno began to leave, Snape spoke quietly, almost as an afterthought. "If you need Felix Felicis, tell me. I have a good deal stored." Eno snorted inwardly. He had suspected Hermione had been misled about extra bottles of Felix, but here was Snape, calmly admitting to a stash. Perhaps it had been a test, he thought. In any case, the potions belonged to Snape, and he could do with them as he pleased. "Not now," Eno answered aloud. "If I need any, I'll come to you." He left the hospital wing, leaving Snape alone beside the rising and falling figure of the sleeping boy. Harry's eyes were closed. His features, pale and composed, bore a curious resemblance to Barty's. The thought irritated Snape. He could not quite force himself to dislike the likeness. And as he stood there, memories returned. The first potions class, 4 years of a student's small rebellions and aspirations, little scenes that seemed to come from another life. Outside the quiet of the hospital, the castle had erupted into a different kind of chaos. Corridors, dormitories, the great hall, and the common rooms swarmed with small knots of students and teachers. No one could handle news on their own. Everyone needed to talk. Even in the corridors, 2 young witches walked side by side, voices low and urgent. "You don't have to worry so much," Hermione told Ginny, taking her friend's hand. Harry's situation required emergency action right after the dragon. They took him so he'd be safe. There shouldn't be anything worse than that. Ginny's face eased, though worry still lingered in her eyes. She had tried to chase after Harry when he was seized from the arena and had only been stopped by the crush of the crowd. Hermione had stayed with her to the end, then raced with her to the hospital as soon as they could. "Thanks, Hermione," Ginny said, forcing a small, grateful smile. I know. Near the entrance to the hospital wing, Eno's path crossed with 2 Gryffindor girls coming towards him. They were light-hearted and perhaps a touch giddy after the day's events, humming tunelessly. "We finished coding today." "La la la," one of them sang. The other giggled, then added, a little breathlessly, Please vote. Eno managed a small, wry smile and stepped aside to let them pass, the castle around them still buzzing with questions and fears, with relief and with the slow, steady work of people trying to make sense of what had happened beneath the bronze oil lamp.